Good evening and welcome to the latest episode of Al-Shabaka's Policy Labs. Thank you for joining us. My name is Nadim Bawalsa. I am the commissioning editor at Al-Shabaka, and I'm honored to be with you tonight facilitating this discussion on a critical topic which affects Palestinians and their allies throughout the world: developing effective strategies for actively responding to the ongoing criminalization of Palestine advocacy. This policy lab is titled Lawfare and Palestine Strategies for Resisting Criminalization. Israel's recent criminalization of 6 Palestinian human rights organizations has sparked global outcry. But this tactic fits into a global trend of lawfare led by right-wing and conservative governments, including in the United States and Europe, against activists and grassroots organizers working to defend the rights of oppressed peoples worldwide. These tactics must be actively resisted politically and legally, and importantly, not defensively. Today, and on the 34th anniversary of the First Palestinian Intifada, Al-Shabaka asks, how can Palestinians and their allies move away from defensively responding to criminalization accusations towards a proactive strategy which challenges the Israeli and US regime's lawfare tactics? How can this approach combine political and legal strategies? And how can it engage intersectionally with other progressive movements? To investigate these questions and more, I am joined this evening by Al-Shabaka policy analyst and co-founder of the BDS movement, Omar Barghouti, and founder and director of Palestine Legal, Dima Khalidi. Omar Barghouti is a Palestinian human rights defender and co-founder of the Palestinian-led Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions Movement for Palestinian Rights. He's a co-recipient of the 2017 Gandhi Peace Award. He holds bachelor's and master's degrees in electrical engineering from Columbia University in New York, and is pursuing a PhD in philosophy at the University of Amsterdam. He's the author of BDS, The Global Struggle for Palestinian Rights, and his commentaries and views have appeared in multiple outlets, including the New York Times, The Guardian, The Washington Post, The Financial Times, AP, Reuters, AFP, The Nation, MSNBC, CNN, BBC, Bloomberg TV, among others. Dima Khalidi is the founder and director of Palestine Legal. She oversees Palestine Legal's array of legal and advocacy work to protect people speaking out for Palestinian freedom from attacks on their civil and constitutional rights. Prior to founding Palestine Legal in 2012, Dima worked as a co-counsel and as an intern with the Center for Constitutional Rights on numerous cases that sought to hold Israeli officials and corporations accountable for Israeli violations of international law. Dima holds a JD from DePaul University College of Law, an MA in International and Comparative Legal Studies from the University of London, SOAS, and a BA in History and Near Eastern Studies from the University of Michigan. Thank you both for joining us this evening. Before we begin, I'd like to inform our viewers of the format of tonight's Policy Lab. For the first 30 minutes or so, I will pose one question to each Omar and Dima, who will then each have 10 minutes or so to respond. While I normally ask more questions during the first half of Policy Labs, due to the nature of the topic, we elected to allow the speakers more time to speak freely. That is, the questions in the first half will not dwell on the details of Israel's criminalization of the 6 human rights groups. Rather, they will focus on exploring ways for moving forward with effective strategies for responding to these lawfare tactics. During the second half of the lab, Omar and Dima will answer questions from you, our audience. At any point throughout the discussion, please submit your questions by clicking on Ask a Question below. And remember that you can vote on the questions you'd like asked. If possible, please direct your question to one of our speakers, and I'll do my best to address as many of the questions as I can. So let's get started. Omar, I'd like to ask the first question to you. You've talked about the importance of Palestinians responding to the recent criminalization accusations and others proactively instead of defensively. You've also described the importance of combining political movements with legal strategies in this proactive response. Based on your extensive work with BDS, with the BDS movement, can you say more about why you believe defensiveness is not the answer? And then what you believe to be an effective, proactive, political and legal strategy in responding to states' lawfare tactics?
Thanks, Nadim, for having me in this important discussion. I agree with you on this 34th anniversary of the First Palestinian Intifada. It's very crucial to discuss this issue of resisting oppression, including resisting lawfare. One of the key lessons we've learned from the First Intifada is that internal unity, internal Palestinian unity, coupled with strategic and well-planned popular resistance that creatively mobilizes every Palestinian who can contribute to the struggle, is an absolute necessity to see the light of liberation at the end of the long, dark tunnel of Israel's regime of occupation, settler colonialism, and apartheid. It's absolutely necessary, but it's not sufficient, as we now know. Without, in parallel, having a very strong, meaningful international solidarity movement that can effectively end international complicity in this regime of oppression, we Palestinians cannot alone, with our resistance, no matter what form of resistance we adopt, we cannot alone defeat this very powerful enemy that is supported by imperial powers, Western powers that are extremely powerful themselves. They fund it, they enable it, they defend it, and they prevent any real accountability against it. So it's extremely important to see the connection between international solidarity and internal resistance combined together to achieve those goals. So the key to defending ourselves, the key to going on the offensive, going in a direction of liberation, is to combine both internal resistance and international meaningful solidarity. In a sense, BDS, which was launched in 2005 by the absolute majority of Palestinian society, captures that combination. It learns from those lessons of decades of Palestinian popular resistance against British colonialism and Zionist settler colonialism. All these lessons we've learned from our people's rich heritage of struggle, we've put to use in the BDS movement, which really combines internal resistance with global meaningful solidarity. So in a way, it's a globalized intifada, BDS. It's a way of globalized intifada, whereby we ask people of conscience, progressives, revolutionaries around the world to shoulder the responsibility of the very least cutting links of complicity, which means doing no harm. I'll explain that in a bit, but I want to go back to this issue of defensive versus proactive strategies in fighting back against all of Israel's system of oppression, including lawfare, which we want to discuss today. It's crucial to remind ourselves that Israeli and Israeli-induced repression and McCarthyism is designed to silence Palestinians, to demonize us, to criminalize our history, our narrative, as well as to silence advocates of our rights. Prompted by Israel and its lobby groups, anti-Palestinian governments like in the US, UK, France, Germany, among others, and many large institutions in the West have adopted, for example, the fraudulent so-called IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism as part of its lawfare, specifically to bully us or minimally to push us to a defensive posture. So that instead of going on a university campus, meeting with a trade union, meeting with artists and advocating for isolating Israeli apartheid, dismantling Israeli apartheid, ending colonialism, ending complicity of companies and institutions in Israel's settler colonialism, you start defending yourself. You're being accused of this bogus anti-Semitism charge because you're advocating Palestinian rights. By definition, according to this definition, you are accused of being anti-Jewish somehow, then you fall into a defensive posture. Especially in the West, this is a very effective mechanism for silencing because of the history of the Holocaust, because of the real presence of anti-Semitism that is a very serious form of racism. But Israel is using this, and the Zionist movement, they're using this to conflate Israel and Zionism on the one hand with anti-Jewish racism, bigotry, and discrimination on the other. One has absolutely nothing to do with the other. But this smear pushes people into a defensive posture. So that their goal is not just to delegitimize our quest for justice, for liberation, for rights, but to immediately divert our energies, our resources away from the fight to end all forms of complicity in Israel's regime of oppression, away from building our grassroots and civil society movement and power to affect policy change, from city councils to national parliaments. They want to shift all those energies away from the real struggles on the ground to defense. Of course, when faced with smears and intimidation and accusations, we must defend ourselves. We must defend our right to freedom of expression and against anti-democratic repression, against McCarthyism. That's for sure. We must defend our right to pursue BDS campaigns proactively to dismantle Israeli apartheid and settler colonialism. But most of this indispensable legal defense is best left to those of us with legal and other relevant expertise that is required to effectively perform this task. For the rest of us, the absolute majority of people doing activism for Palestine, doing solidarity across the world, or fighting globally for Palestinian rights, our main response to this lawfare must be to further grow our resistance and solidarity, to intensify BDS campaigns everywhere, mainstreaming our demands, and expanding our impact on policy makers at all levels. So going on the offensive, so to speak, becoming more proactive, expanding our movement is the right response. And of course, while reminding the whole world about who's the true criminal here. So instead of saying, oh, I'm not a criminal, I'm not this, I'm not that, it doesn't really help. When you defend yourself against an accusation and you keep repeating the accusation, you inadvertently reinforce the accusation. And people with time drop the not, I am not, and they see you and this accusation together in the same sentence, and they make this mental image of you as being really that, what you're accused of. So it's best not to go there. Leave that to legal experts. They know how best to take those smears and accusations and deal with them when they do damage, when they really hurt you, when your event is canceled, when you're denied tenure, when as a student you're thrown out of some organization or not allowed to do your activism on campus. All these cases that groups like Palestine Legal are handling so professionally, that's what they do in a very effective manner. But what do the students do? Should we all then stop doing activism and start working on defense? Absolutely not. We should do more Israeli Apartheid Week events. We should do more BDS events. We should do more coalition building with Black Justice Movement, Indigenous, Latino, Latina, women's groups, LGBT groups, climate justice groups, progressive Jewish groups. We should continue expanding, growing, mainstreaming our demands, making every person on earth know Israel is no democracy. Israel is a settler colonial apartheid state and must be boycotted and must be targeted for lawful sanctions as South African apartheid was. This is the work, this is the best response that we need to do to prevent them from pushing us into a defensive posture. Let's take the UK, for example. Not because the US is not important, obviously, but I want to stress the UK because there you have a combination of overwhelming popular trade union, civil society support for Palestinian freedom, justice, and equality on the one hand, and a staunchly anti-Palestinian, McCarthyite, right-wing, increasingly inept and corrupt government that's obsessively fighting BDS, obsessively fighting Palestinian rights. Despite this repression from the top and intervention and trying to interfere with trade union decisions on Palestine and really ugly intervention by the Boris Johnson government and the currently neoliberal anti-Palestinian Zionist leadership of the Labour Party, the opposition, despite this and despite the adoption of IHRA's bogus definition of anti-Semitism, the Trades Union Congress in the UK, which represents millions of workers, has condemned Israeli apartheid, has called for ending military trade with Israel, and has endorsed pressuring corporations to end their complicity in Israel's violations of Palestinian rights. Despite adopting the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, the Labour Party itself has in its recent conferences adopted a freeze of arms sales to Israel, reiterated its support for the Palestinian refugees' right of return, the absolute most important right of all Palestinian rights, because it addresses the rights of the absolute majority of Palestinians. And Labour Party in its conference has, its latest conference, just months ago, called for sanctions to dismantle Israel's apartheid regime. So the IHRA, while intended to chill speech on Palestine, to criminalize talking about BDS or sanctions or anything of that sort, the absolute majority of labor union leaders, activists, Palestine Solidarity Campaign activists, and so on, kept pushing and succeeded in passing a very important resolution. So they refused to be chilled in a way. A chilling effect is most repressive when we accept to be chilled. I mean, sometimes you cannot do anything about it, but most times maybe you can do something about it. When we fight back, when we work with expert organizations like Palestine Legal or European Legal Support Center in Europe, when we connect with mainstream civil liberties organizations, CCR in the US, ACLU, and so on, to protect our freedom of expression, we mitigate the dangers of being chilled, of being silenced, of being bullied into silence. And I'm speaking from experience. It's not a theoretical, philosophical position for me. Despite direct repression against me by the Israeli apartheid regime and its accomplices in the Trump administration in 2019, the Boris Johnson government in 2020, travel bans, death threats by Israelis, threats by government ministers in Israel of targeted civil elimination of myself, and so on and so forth, I have not just not bowed to this pressure, I've actively intensified my activism as a human rights defender, turning this repression wave, which was scary, intimidating, but I've managed to turn it with a lot of support from so many around the world, including from Amnesty International and major human rights organizations around the world. We've managed to turn this repression into another opportunity to expose Israel's settler colonial policies against human rights defenders and freedom of expression. So condemnations of Israel came from all corners of the world. And this is one way to first protect myself against real threats, against, I don't know what the Israeli government might do to me. There's no way to tell, but at least going public, going on actively, proactively exposing what they're saying, they're threatening me with, helps protect me first and helps protect other human rights defenders and helps protect the movement in a way. This is one example. There's so many other examples of how we can go in a proactive way and expose Israel's regime for what it does. So certainly there's legal strategies that I'm sure Dima is an expert on and will speak about. But from an activist perspective, from political activism, social activism, from a justice movement perspective, we have to keep our eyes on the course, keep expanding the movement, keep growing the movement. Do not accept bullying as intimidating as it can be. Continue going with building the movement. So there's so many examples around the world of how we responded to bullying by building the movement, by expanding our networks with artists, with academics, with student groups, and so many others. I guess I'll stop here, and then maybe if you have any other questions, I can respond to them.
Thank you, Omar. Very informative, and I think the key takeaway is not to give in, as you pointed out, and that not to believe that there aren't venues out there or avenues that can be taken to sort of mobilize on existing successful attempts at boycott and so on, and to not be sort of threatened or pressured to respond defensively. Dima, let's move on to the incredible work that you do through Palestine Legal, and to get more at the legal aspect of things. You have extensive experience working in the legal sphere, especially when it comes to defending Palestine advocacy. You've also described the importance of responding to lawfare by not only defending Palestine advocates, but embracing them politically and legally. Can you say more about this? And what do you believe Palestinians can learn from other social justice movements, their legal defense strategies, certainly the Black Lives Matter movement, but other movements as well? And please feel free to provide examples as Omar did.
Thanks, Nadim, and great to be with you. Thank you to Al-Shabaka, and always an honor to be with you, Omar. I think everything that Omar said resonates very well with me and with our experience working to protect the movement in the US against the repression machine. And one of the things that I think is really important to start with is just an understanding that the attacks, this repression machine, is actually a response to the effectiveness of our movement. The movement is in fact our offense, right? And I think, Omar, you say this all the time. So Israel is doing everything that it can to undermine this movement, undermine Palestinian civil society in Palestine, as well as here in the US and in Europe and elsewhere. And as Omar said, the primary tactic really is to isolate, to make untouchable individuals, organizations, movements as a whole. The designations illustrate this. The tactic of going after individuals, harassing them, smearing their reputations through Canary Mission and all of these other doxing McCarthyite type websites and whatnot, all illustrate this tactic, right? It's designed to make it too costly to engage in the movements, in our movements here, our solidarity movements, as well as on the ground in Palestine. So that really is what we have to resist. We have to reject Israel's attempts to make pariahs out of organizations and individuals. And what that requires is really to envelop individuals and organizations and the movement with support. As Ahmad described, the best defense is to increase our numbers, to increase our voices, to make it clear that we're not going to let people be dragged under the bus in silence and alone, right? To reject these smears, these designations, these accusations at their root. They're entirely unfounded. They are they are political in nature. They are designed to criminalize us. So I think this all kind of repeats what Omar was saying, that we can't give any credibility to these kinds of attacks. So what does that look like? I think the response to the designations is one, I think, good example of the importance of having a cacophony of voices, from foundations to human rights organizations to individuals and academics and civil society groups, raising their voices and saying this is unacceptable. We will not abide. We will continue to support. We will, we reject this move. And of course, it has to go beyond that. We have to engage other strategies. We have to also use this as an opportunity to mobilize support. I think the other point here is that we really can't be responding on their terms. Again, going off of what Omar said, the odds are stacked against us if we are operating in the quote terrorism framework. This entire framework, the anti-terrorism laws, the international and domestic, were created, or they were literally molded and manufactured to create liability against Palestinians, while shielding Israel from liability, and the U.S. Right. So we have to not only be challenging these particular designations by Israel, but we really have to challenge the entire framework of the war on terrorism, of anti-terrorism laws, the politicized nature of the designations themselves, not just the designation of the groups, but the designation of all Palestinian political parties, right? The designation of, who gets to decide, who is making these determinations, on what basis, who's the terrorist, what is terrorism, right? So I think going back, and I think that speaks also to the importance of not responding to these kinds of accusations, as Omar said, by saying we're not this, and also not accepting or affirming this terrorism framework by saying, well, this group might be, but we're not, or right. So I think just rejecting the entire framework is really critical here. I think in terms of Palestine legal and our role and the way we see the role of lawyers in the movement, again, the movement is our offense, and obviously it's being attacked. We see our job really as making sure that efforts to make people and groups radioactive don't work, that people aren't isolated, that they have the confidence and the courage to keep going, and doing the work, which is the activism, which is BDS, which is raising awareness, etc., wherever they are. To reject the goal of intimidation and silencing. That means we have to rally. People have to speak up and stand out, and continue the organizing on the ground. I think that that going to the other part of your question, Nadim, that part of this is the critical work of connecting our issues, right? We're not alone here. The repression is not unique. We know that governments throughout history have attacked dissent, have repressed dissent, and so we have to learn from those movements historically, and we have to ally with movements here doing the work, right? Doing similar work, dissenting against the systematic injustices that are so prevalent. A couple of lessons, I think, from more recent movements that I think are worthwhile to point to. I think the movement for Black Lives has been really inspirational in terms of, yes, building the immediate legal defense that's needed. When we're talking about the racial justice uprising in the US and the way that Lawfare Black Lives and other groups have built legal defense to protect to defend those who are arrested and prosecuted, etc. But also looking at the long game. They created an entire policy platform that was on their terms, that defined the kind of world that they want to build. What are the laws that they want to create, that instead of criminalizing and policing and disinvesting in Black communities, are empowering and building and protecting those communities. And so I think the Palestine movement can learn a lot from that approach of really thinking long-term, strategically, building, imagining our own future, And that work is happening, of course, and there are so many groups working towards that in the US and internationally. And that's what we have to support. That's what we have to be focused on, is rather, as Omar says, rather than on defending ourselves against these bogus accusations, on really thinking about our future and what that we want that to look like and what we need to do to get there. I think it's true of the indigenous rights movement as well. The way that there has been a movement to really define what's important and why why are we protecting our land and our resources against the despoilation by companies and the oil industry, et cetera, and building that solidarity at Standing Rock and in the Line 3, the fight against Line 3 in Minnesota, et cetera. So there's the necessity of the legal defense. There have been over 1,000 people arrested protesting Line 3, and there are groups building that legal defense, but also continue in order for folks to continue the fight on the ground and to build that power. I think another important point is just how critical the organizing on a grassroots and local level is, as well as intersectionally. And I think a couple of examples of that are just the incredible organizing that happened in Durham, North Carolina, where there was a local campaign with different communities coming together and succeeding in getting the city council to ban international police exchanges, military, policing, training for police in Israel specifically, but all around. So, the way that this allows us to really connect police violence against Black people in the United States with Israel's violence against Palestinians, it's to connect the colonial legacies of both countries, and the racist policing that militarization that underlies these powers are really important ways to connect our issues and connect our struggles, and to not be doing this work alone, because the militarization of police, the militarized policing of dissent affects all of us, really. So and this kind of grew out of organizing in 2014, when organizers in Durham also were able to end the city's contract with G4S because of its role in supplying military and prison equipment and operations to Israel. So, I think the grassroots, the local, the intersectional work is really critical, as opposed to just setting our sights on Congress, in the U.S., who we know is maybe beyond savior at this point, but it trickles up when we organize on the local level. That's how we can build power and grow our movement, and connect our struggles on from the local to the international, ultimately. I think the other point here in terms of cross-movement work is that, the broader way that autocratic regimes undermine dissent, we know this both historically and currently, right? That the terrorism word right now is most associated with us, with Arabs, with Muslims, with Palestinians, and the formulation and the deployment of law against our communities has really served to undermine so much of the constitutional protections in both the criminal and civil arenas, right? And the fact that this is being extended to other movements really underlines the importance of connecting our struggles and our resistance to this criminalization. We see Zionist efforts to call Black Lives Matter terrorist because they take a stand for Palestine, and because Palestinians support the movement for Black lives and are, on the ground showing up at protests and in the movement. We see terrorism being used to justify surveillance of Standing Rock activists. Private security companies are saying, oh, there are some Arabs here. We have to continue to surveil these people to make sure there's no terrorism happening. We see terrorism prosecutions used against environmental rights activists, animal rights activists. One case that I recently talked to a Louisiana lawyer about, there was two white women activists who were charged with terrorism for putting plastic nurdles, like those packaging or plastic material, on the doorstep of a chemical lobbyist. It took 8 or 10 months to dismiss the charges, but in the meantime, what does that do to a person who is being accused with such a hefty accusation? They were put on no-fly lists. They had to really rally defense. So this is not. These are all signs that this regime of so-called terrorism is really aimed at political dissenters. Just like in Israel, it's a political tool to shut down resistance, and not just to the government, but to corporate powers as well. So, our job is really to make people and groups able to continue doing the work, as Omar says, to ensure that our offense is able to continue. And that's I think one of the most important legal strategies. And we can talk more about other ways that we can use the law, but I think it's really critical to understand this notion that the law, as it is not really our friend. It is created to maintain the status quo. It's created by the powers that be to defend those powers, and so we really should be focused on imagining new realities, new futures.
Thank you, Dima. That was such a rich take on just how much legal efforts are being deployed in the service of coming together and intersectional work around indigenous and oppressed people's rights globally. There's a question that came up in the question box below that relates very much to Dima, what you've been saying, but in the interest of going back to Omar first, I'd like to ask another question that came up during the Q&A to Omar before going back to Dima. Omar, the question here is about sort of to the extent that political activism or a sort of a proactive strategy to resist lawfare tactics, to the extent that it differs from context to context within different states, and certainly within Palestine, what options exist for Palestinians in Palestine to resist lawfare tactics, certainly because oppressive structural regimes there look quite different than they do, let's say, in the United States or elsewhere?
Yes, thanks for this question. Well, there is no easy answer because it depends on what tactic is being used against us. But I'll give an example. When the BDS movement, when the BNC, the Palestinian BDS National Committee, the largest coalition Palestinian society that leads the global BDS movement, was attacked by the Ministry of Strategic Affairs, Israeli ministry, which is the anti-BDS ministry. It was disbanded just very recently, by the way, after it was a total flop, obviously. The movement kept growing, so they disbanded it. But for years, they spent tens of millions of dollars in fighting BDS with a fully dedicated ministry. They published this brochure glossy brochure all over Europe and the US, accusing the BDS movement of all sorts of things. We've got questions from all wired networks, and what do you do? How do you respond to this in Palestine? I mean, it's quite dangerous. So our response, after a lot of deliberation, we said, we'll ignore it. We will not dignify this with an answer. We don't dignify rubbish with an answer. So some of the media bureau chiefs were, seriously, I mean, that's all your response? We say, yeah, I mean, read the booklet. It's trash. We can't respond to trash. And after they read the booklet, indeed, one media bureau chief of a major Western media outlet said, you were absolutely right to ignore it. So ignoring, we call it the capital I principle, ignore. Whenever it's not really mainstream, whenever it's not really, really hurting you, just ignore it. No matter how scary it looks, ignore it. But of course, a legal recourse does not exist in Palestine, because the Israeli so-called justice system is a system of injustice. Going to Israeli courts is absolutely useless. 99-point-something% conviction rate of Palestinians, no matter whatever you're accused of, you're guilty. Guilty of being Palestinian, just like blacks are guilty for driving in the US. You make a wrong signal and you get arrested. In Palestine, it's even worse. So we have to take our cases internationally. That's the key point. We cannot keep it within the Israeli apartheid system because it's an apartheid system. We have to seek justice outside by going internationally, exposing it internationally.
Thank you, Omar. Dima, something came up about, well, this could really be to either of you, but Dima, based on your discussion earlier about strategies using legal tactics, in terms of calling out sort of attackers and accusers legally, how is it, or even in terms of political movements as well, maybe to Omar later, but legally, how can the strategy be proactive and legal and respond to these accusations, while, I mean, it's a delicate balance, while not amplifying the voices of those making the accusations and leveling those claims? I mean, one point would be to just not use the T word at all, but still giving voice to these positions, and legal platforms can also give value to them. So is there any strategy or ways to avoid or to go about that in a more delicate way?
Well, I think to your question about exposing the folks behind this, I think that's really important. You know, we can do a lot more to really, I think, Omar, you said this already, to really show who is behind this and why and what their agenda is. You know, when you look at who is pushing not just anti-terrorism laws, but let's say the anti-boycott laws or the IHRA laws, that is coming directly from Israel. Why is Israel interested in legislating in the US against BDS, against the movement, and Zionist groups in the US as well, lobby groups who are pushing for this legislation that punishes, that criminalizes, that makes BDS beyond the pale, right? And so I think there's a lot more that we can do to expose who is behind these kinds of threats, right? And that goes for Lawfare as well. If you look at Shurat Hadin, which is an Israeli legal organization that is behind a lot of terrorism lawsuits against advocacy groups and others, and threats of lawsuits. You know, they are connected. They have been exposed to be connected with the Mossad. They have, you know, what the director's husband is like a convicted terrorist, right? A terrorist. He has engaged in violence against Palestinians and has been prosecuted. So this kind of exposure is really critical. There could be legal strategies to do that as well. And I think, as I said earlier, we also have to be careful, because all of the legal tools are double-edged swords. If you go after Canary Mission for defamation, that is giving them a platform as well to say, that we're actually the victims and our free speech is being attacked, and that is something that they actually crave. So I think these things have to be done very carefully and strategically, and as part of a much larger strategy. We as lawyers shouldn't just go out and say, oh, we're going to sue this and so and who and whatnot. It has to really be part of a movement strategy to say, this is one element of our strategy against whatever groups, and we have to be able to withstand legal losses as well. The courts are not a friendly forum. We have won a lot of cases in courts against the anti-boycott laws. The ACLU and CARE have litigated against anti-boycott laws and have been winning. But if it goes to our Supreme Court, which we all understand is an enemy right now, who knows what will happen to our First Amendment rights, which are being eroded every day. So I think we can't jump into using legal strategies without doing it in a very thoughtful, strategic, and it has to be a long-term strategy, because the Supreme Court case that ultimately bolsters our right to boycott was about boycotts against white businesses in the segregated South in the 60s. And it wasn't until 1982 that the Supreme Court ruled that boycotts are protected First Amendment activities. That obviously the boycotts were over. It was a done deal, and that decision is still really important for us and for protecting civil liberties and free expression. But my point is that legal strategies can't lead the way here, right? They are sometimes defensive, but where they're offensive, we have to really integrate them into our broader political and organizing strategies.
Thank you, Dima. Just in the interest of time, I'd like to, inshallah, get one more question in for each of you. Some of our members or our audience are submitting comments and questions in the chat box, which I'm going through, and they're very interesting. One of our participants makes the point, and this is to Omar, makes the point that in South Africa or in Southern Africa, all liberation movements were called the T word in Rhodesia, as well as some groups in South Africa. Specifically speaking about the South African context, though, because for obvious reasons when it comes to joint apartheid struggles, a lot of people compare the Palestinian condition to that of South Africa during apartheid. What would you say are the differences and similarities, and what can be learned from that context specifically in terms of political movements at this level of strategizing to respond to these sorts of accusations?
It's a very broad question, but just in a nutshell, yes, it's a settler colonial system, as is the Palestinian situation, apartheid, as those are the similarities. But of course, even under this general umbrella of settler colonialism and apartheid, they were very different. As Archbishop Desmond Tutu and Ronnie Castrels and many South African leaders who are our allies have said, Israeli apartheid is far worse. We've never seen F-16s bomb Bantustans, for example. Israel does that regularly in the Gaza ghetto, killing hundreds of Palestinians, thousands of Palestinians, including many children. They have never seen anything like that, of that scale, in South Africa. So in a way, it's much worse. The Israeli system of oppression is much worse. We learned a lot of tactics from the South African struggle, especially the international solidarity, how to integrate boycotts, divestments, and so on into international strategies of resistance, of solidarity. As I said, the First Intifada was a brilliant act of internal resistance, but the solidarity outside was what? Demonstrations and letters to the editors? With all due respect, it's great, but it doesn't do anything on the ground. Does Israel care about letters to the editors? I mean, hardly. Without feeling the heat of boycotts and divestment, without feeling it in the academic, cultural, sports, financial, in every aspect, without cutting the links of complicity, the Israeli regime will continue with billions of dollars from the US, Germany, and support from France and the UK and Europe and so on. It will continue. So it's extremely important this is the main lesson, that effective international solidarity, as was done with South Africa, is exactly what we're doing in the BDS movement. And that's the key lesson. And of course, there are many differences between us and them. For one major thing is we have technology today. They did not in the past. We used to get all these instructions when I was a student at Columbia University. The ANC used to send faxes from some clandestine basement to the movement in the US. This is what we need you to do. And it will trickle down to all the student activists and so on. Now we have all kinds of technologies, social media, email, and so on. So that gives us an advantage in a way of going a bit faster.
Thank you, Omar. Finally, I have a question for Dima before we close. This gets at the heart of sort of the legal game, and we have a question from an audience member. Do you see a potential in legally discrediting terrorism as a term that can be levied against social movements and political movements? Is there an international legal definition of terrorism, such as those available for apartheid or genocide, that can be challenged or that can be used to denounce attempts to levy that term against different groups today? And is there value in taking that approach? I guess this goes back to the point of giving voice to that perspective to begin with.
There are many many definitions of terrorism, and the problem is that they are all constructed by governments, and they are designed to protect governments from accountability for what any person could describe as state sanctioned terrorism. So I think the terrorism framework as a whole, the word terrorism has been co-opted, has been created and used to specifically go after certain resistance movements, certain dissident factions, etc. So that is a fundamental problem, and that is what I think we have to start again. Like, this is a very long-term struggle, I think, to contest, to challenge the word, the definitions, the laws that make up this infrastructure of anti-terrorism legislation and policies, right, that are designed again to go after. I think Palestine is, and Israel has been a big force behind the creation of the anti-terrorism regime. So they are designed to go after, Palestinian resistance in particular, but have been deployed obviously globally against Islamic movements, Muslim movements, as well. So that is all to say that I think there has to be broad mobilization, a long-term strategy to confront and challenge this entire regime, the designations, the word, the definitions, internationally and domestically, because they're linked, and the whole apparatus is, there's a lot of intergovernmental, resource sharing and information sharing, et cetera, that is happening. When we see prosecutions in the US, we see Israel itself providing the evidence, providing the witnesses, providing the impetus to prosecute in the first place. So there's a lot of work to do, but we have to start and build that momentum to really look at the bigger picture. The designations right now, I think, afford us an opportunity to start that conversation, and there are ways to start chipping away. Domestically, looking at the particular laws and how we can kind of begin to explain how these are actually designed to go after advocacy for Palestinian rights, and are being used more and more to go after advocacy for Palestinian rights and Palestinian humanitarian assistance, right? When we saw in a couple of decades ago the use of terrorism laws to go after humanitarian aid to Palestine. So really illustrating how these laws are affecting, have ripple effects beyond just the organizations that we know of, and are affecting other movements, and are affecting our advocacy work, are affecting foundations. Right now, we know that the designations are intended to go after funding for Palestinian organizations that are exposing Israel's liability, trying to get accountability for Israel's actions, and we're already seeing groups going after foundations here in the U.S. For funding these organizations. So we have to. It's going to be a long and slow process, but I think if we are focused on this larger goal of saying, this entire regime is a problem and has to be dismantled, and looking at again getting inspiration from the abolitionist movement in the U.S. We have to think bigger and think about what is needed in order to achieve the freedom and justice that we're calling for.
Thank you, Dima. Omar, since this question is kind of a big question, I would love to give you a chance to respond as well. The value of addressing terrorism legally or politically as well, please.
I know I wanted to amplify something Dima has mentioned in response earlier about this intersectionality. I remember I had a speaking tour in the United States when I said those anti-BDS laws that Israel was still beginning to get its lobby to pass in states in the US will not stop at Palestinians. Those who think if violating freedom of expression on Palestine will stop there are dead wrong. Just like those who thought the initial McCarthyism will stop with socialists and communists and Jewish Hollywood figures and so on, that was proven wrong. Any dissenter was prosecuted by the system, persecuted by the system, I should say. And indeed, today, as Dima had mentioned, we see anti-BDS laws being templates used for the fossil fuel industry, for the gun industry, even to attack women's rights, abortion rights, Roe versus Wade. The anti-BDS legislation and that erosion of First Amendment rights is being used to suppress other communities. So what we've been saying for years is coming true, unfortunately. This gives us even more reason to work intersectionally, not just out of ethical principles, but out of strategic necessity. We're in it together, and united we must be to fight this much more united oppression.
That was a very empowering final message, Omar. Thank you. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Thank you so much, Omar and Dima, for joining us this evening and for sharing your expert insights into this critical topic, which is developing effective political and legal strategies for responding to Israeli, US, and even some European countries' attempts to criminalize Palestine advocacy. You've shown us that combining political and legal strategies and tactics should be a fundamental part of planning for these strategies, and that embracing and defending so-called criminalized voices or criminal voices is also fundamentally part of this process, rather than distancing from them. You've also shown us that, without a doubt, intersectional and collaborative work with groups like Black Lives Matter and other indigenous groups would go a long way in challenging lawfare, especially in the US, where a lot of these movements are already underway. I personally feel very energized and hopeful after this discussion, and I hope that the audience feels similarly. So thank you both. يعطيكم ألف عافية. I'd also like to thank our audience across the world for attending this Policy Lab and for submitting your engaging thoughts and questions. Finally, before we sign off, I'd like to remind everyone that Policy Labs are a crowdfunded program of the Shabaka, so we do rely on your continued support. Shabaka is also in the midst of our year-end fundraising campaign. We're working to raise essential funds to support our activities, including our Policy Labs, throughout next year. With a gift today, you can help to recenter Palestinian voices, reimagine a Palestinian future, and rethink what's possible in 2022. If you are able to donate, please do so by clicking on the donate link that should now appear on your screens. And with that, I wish you all a happy end to 2021, happy holidays, and a healthy and safe and free 2022, if we can say that. Thank you both so much for attending, and good night to everyone.
Thank you, Nadim. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, Omar.
Good night.